Hey guys, and welcome to a Betwixt the Books review. That's right, Gretchen and I read the same book for like the first time in a year. Not really, I'm pretty sure we read the same book at some point in August, but you know how it is. We've been trying to do the Betwixt content again, and we have a review. We read the same book. This time I recommended it. It is Almost Adulting by Arden Rose, who is a fellow YouTuber. Arden was somebody that I started watching while I was in high school, and I know that we are about 2 years older than she is, but when I was in high school, one of the first things that got me into YouTube were beauty videos, which is common, I think, for young girls. They start watching the beauty tutorials, although as I grew older, I cared less about the makeup side and cared more about the fashion side. But I think I always kept watching Arden because she had such a unique personality, and when she put up her book trailer for this guy, which I will hopefully be able to link in the cards up above, I immediately went, okay, no, I have to read this guy. So I went ahead and bought it, read it in about one sitting, handed it to Gretchen, said you need to read this so that we can talk about it, and that's what we did.
So this is the book. This is actually Michaela's copy, but she lent it out to me. So if you're wondering what this sucker looks like, it's very thin. And so it was a really fast read, which I really enjoyed. It was a very light read as well. I have a very tenuous relationship with self-help books, what this is ostensibly. And I ended up rating it about 3 stars on Goodreads because while I enjoyed it, I found that it was fun to read and fast to read. I didn't end up feeling like I took much away from it. And then there were some places where it was a bit preachy at times. I feel like if you are looking for a quick little pick-me-up as you're struggling through this thing we call life, especially if you're like early teens or, you know, not early teens, especially if you're late teens or early 20s, this might be fun, but it's not gonna wow change your life.
Coming from the perspective of someone who has watched Arden and is a fan of Arden and what she does, I rated it 4 stars. I'm not like a super huge fan of hers. If this was like a Dodger book, you could maybe not trust my opinion so much because I am just so in love with her and wish that she were my bestest friend ever. With Arden, it's more of just somebody that I feel like I've watched grow up and enjoy the personality of. So I step back in time and time again. And really, like, the thing that I enjoyed was listening to these stories. It felt like sort of like sitting down with a friend, I think, for a lot of her fans, because she is in the beauty genre on YouTube. A lot of her fans are going to be younger, and it would be like sitting down with a big sister, which I think she takes into herself when making these YouTube videos and making things like this book, is that she very much understands that she's in a position of power and wants to make sure that she's being a good role model for the people that follow her.
So when Michaela first showed me this book, we had a lot of discussion about whether it was a teen book or something for 20-somethings. Because it starts off with kind of her talking about how she's moved out to LA on her own and doesn't have, you know, enough time or like a mental capacity to like remember to do her laundry. So it really is about her having struck out on her own, but in the Barnes & Noble, it was shelved in teen nonfiction. And Michaela submitted this title correction to say maybe, you know, 20-somethings, and they said, no, this is where this book's gonna stay. So we were talking a lot about where this is aimed. And it's kind of strange for me because as a 20-something who's older than Arden, like, a lot of this was familiar but not new. So again, it really wasn't changing the way that I thought about too many things, or wasn't being like, hey, this thing. It was just kind of like a nice little pat on the shoulder, like, it's okay, which is another thing. But at the same time, a couple of things that it talked about maybe isn't relatable to younger teens, because it's just not the struggles that they're going through yet. So if you wanted this book, perhaps, you know, you'd want to give it to an older teen, maybe going off to college for the first time, who would be about to experience these things. Because if you've lived through them like once or twice, again, this is pretty surface level stuff that she's talking about. And, you know, you're just like, I know I'm going to be okay. I'm living. I'm working on it. But it might be comforting for somebody just starting out at this place in their life.
I will say that that scene that Gretchen mentioned when she opens the book about how she's struck out on her own for the first time is really what sold the book to me. The book trailer is brilliant and I do love it, but I think that when I picked it up in the store, I sat to read some of it on my break to see if I really wanted to pay for something, especially the hardcover of something, because those are quite expensive. And really that first chapter like hit me and I loved it. And I think the thing that really hit me was the humor that she has. She's very self-deprecating in a way that makes it relatable. Like Gretchen was saying, it's something that we've lived through. And again, while it would be new to somebody who's just starting out on their own, even though we have lived through it, something like her humor has made it enjoyable. And like this book could have been very, very boring without it. I think that really it's Arden's voice and Arden's humor that brings out a lot of like the positive things in this book. Like the writing style is very important to it.
So again, like I said, the success of a self-help book for me depends on if I feel like I'm being given advice or if I'm being told like I should do something this way. And the chapters in this book were really like could go one way or the other for me. I had some chapters where, you know, I felt like she was really trying to give me advice or suggest, hey, I found out that this works for me. And then there were other chapters where it was just like, you know, this should be this way in a way, like, you know, don't feel this way, feel this other way. Which is weird because her last chapter is like, you can feel sad, you can feel happy, you can feel whatever you want to feel. But in the middle, there were some parts where I really did feel like she was like, you know, feel this way about this particular thing. It wasn't as overbearing as it's definitely been in some books that I read, but because it happened like a couple of times, those are really jarring for me, and I don't respond well to that. I already don't respond well to like what I was feeling the book was doing, which is like the gentle pat, 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 it's gonna be okay. Like, I don't respond to that in like a repetitive motion, and then I don't respond to people telling me like, feel this way. So again, I enjoyed the book. It was fun, but there were certain parts of it where I just sat back and I went, no, like that's not how it goes, or like, no, I don't want to be told how to like feel, because my experience has been different. And that is especially relating to the relationship stuff that she talks about in the book. Go, Michaela.
One of the things that I had issues with, and because this is a self-help book, and especially because places like Barnes & Noble are shelving it in the teen section, is that there were some of the bits of advice she gave on relationships that I felt were not necessarily even helpful, but more so than that, they were rather unhealthy. Having watched her, I know that she's only had really 2 boyfriends. Both of them were very long-term boyfriends, so she hasn't had a whole lot of dating experience in the idea of range. So when she's giving this advice that has to do with how she is in relationships, I didn't necessarily feel like she had a whole lot of experience with it to start with, and then also just being the type of person I am, some of the advice she was giving felt unhealthy in the way that she was saying, you know, if you're with somebody and they don't like a thing that you're doing, you can change that in order to fit better their lifestyle. And I am much less a person who would want to do that, would want to change my life to fit better into somebody else's life. I would rather come to a happy medium or discuss which things they would be changing to fit better into my life. It isn't always about, like, molding yourself into the person that the other person wants. And in fact, it's quite unhealthy to try to do that, because then you're stifling parts of yourself that actually make you happy, and you end up being unhappy for reasons that are your own fault. So that section, especially with her talking about relationship advice, was not the strongest, and it might be a personal taste thing. It might be that, again, she hasn't had quite as much experience, and she is still younger than us, and while some people will say, well, 2 years isn't all that much, 2 years in your 20s is a whole lot of life experience. Anybody who's lived through that will tell you that.
I think at the end of the day, it might be that age gap. It might be the fact that this book, for me, didn't go very in depth into a lot of the issues that she was talking about, and it didn't give me any new advice, basically. It just kind of repeated in different ways that were more or less personal to her things that I've already been told multiple times, that I didn't take anything away from the book. And if I'm going to read something self-help, that's what I want at the end of the day. At least one piece of advice that sticks with me and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to take that forward and use that to help me moving forward. I didn't get that. It was just like repetitive and funny ways to repeat stuff that I more or less already knew. And yes, with a lot of this advice, sometimes you have to hear it multiple times for it to get through a very like thick and depressed negative skull. But at the same time, it wasn't really presented to me in any different way that it made any kind of an impact. It just kind of went, oh, okay, cool, I read it, the book is over, that was fun, I'm gonna pick up something else now. So that's me.
The other thing that gets a lot of criticism is, just in general in the community right now, is this idea of a YouTuber book, where publishers are going to rather large YouTubers or YouTubers with a fairly decent-sized audience already and saying, write a book because we'll make money, and this idea that it's a cash grab. And while Gretchen and I both agreed that she's maybe not the most... Like she hasn't experienced everything in a way that would make her the best self-help writer, because she is talking about her own experience and she is talking about this time in her life that she's technically still going through. It comes across as very relatable. And again, as someone who has watched Arden for years on YouTube, I can tell that she wrote this book herself. This isn't a Zoella scandal where they're just putting her name on it. You can hear Arden in everything she says in this book. So it's a mix of both. It's a mix of saying she maybe would not have been able to publish this book had she gone to a publisher organically and said, I've written this self-help book for late teens, early 20s, and they're like, yes, but you're still that age. Like, I don't understand. You can't really talk about this. But because she has that audience, it gives her a little bit more clout and gives her a little bit more access. But at the same time, this means that she has one book under her belt, and, like, I like her voice. So I would be interested to hear more from her later when she has more things under her belt. Maybe not necessarily nonfiction like this, maybe something fictional, because her humor is A+ again. But that's another thing, is like discussing, she is so young and this is her first book, and because she is so young, she only has so much that she can write about. And I think with what she did a very good job of it, especially for her age and for everything that she has going on in her life.
So that's our review of Almost Adulting by Arden Rose, and we hope that you enjoyed it. Hopefully we'll be getting back to doing more of these together. As you know, we both still do live in Massachusetts. Don't let this like 2-camera thing confuse you. But my car is still being held by Subaru because I bought a car and they will not release my title. So I'm not so mobile currently. Thanks, Subaru. Also, you can check in at the end of the month. We will be doing our Bibliomancies for Beginner monthly episode, hopefully on the 26th of this month. It'll be On Writing by Stephen King. And so you can look forward to that. The only reason it wouldn't be the 26th is if one of us gets scheduled to close, which could happen because retail schedules only go out so far. But either way, then we'll work it out sometime else that week. So read On Writing and come listen to that with us. Thanks, guys.